Tonight, we got Rob and Andy Overton, Life on the Water. Rob and Andy, raise your hand and wave.
Yep,
Yes,
here we
good.
are.
Here we are.
Next month, we are going to have Kenichi Hori, a Japanese sailor who is sailing solo from San Francisco to Japan right off the guest dock of San Francisco Yacht Club. He sailed from Japan to San Francisco and then back again when he was 23. He's 83 now. So he's got some great stories. He sails a 19-foot sailboat. The original one was called Mermaid, and I think the new one's probably called Mermaid too. It's a replica. If you've been over to the Aquatic Museum over in near Ghirardelli, and you walked out on the back deck, his boat was there for years. This is, 40 years ago, and complete with, I think he had a problem. The cabin was bashed in, but they put it up in its entirety. His charts are there, his dividers are there. It's quite a story. So he will be here March 23rd to speak. And then that Saturday, March 26th, he'll take off. And I think we're going to do a little ceremony for him. April, we're going to have Kimball Livingston. Everybody knows who Kimball is. In May, if you followed the national funding scandal for colleges, you probably heard that John Vandermoor was involved as he was the Stanford sailing coach. From what I see, he's got a new book called Rigged Justice. He's been on national TV with it, and he's going to come and talk to us about it in May. August, we've got, everybody knows Larry and Jamie McCullough. They are the San Francisco Night Watch Trophy winners for Cruiser of the Year 2021. They're off Mexico right now. And I talked to Larry a couple of weeks ago, and he said he's got some great stories. So back to Rob and Andy, members of San Francisco Yacht Club. We know Rob is from U.S. Sailing. He's been the chair of U.S. Sailing's Racing Rules Committee. He's an international umpire and national judge, and he's been certified for just about everything else at one time or another. But more important, yeah. But more important tonight, we're going to hear about their stories on the water. So Rob, there is a rumor that you and Andy met in high school, and although you never dated and you had a girlfriend, and apparently she had a boyfriend, one day Rob asked you to marry him without ever dating. Is that true? And what I really want to know is, what did he say?
Hey, John, that was am I muted still?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No.
That was a long time ago. I don't remember the exact words, but I said, I'll think about it. And I thought about it for over a year. And then I said, yeah, okay, let's do that.
Who actually proposed to go cruising?
You asked us that earlier, and we started thinking about it, and I don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't remember whose idea it was. It was just sort of like, one of these days we're going to go cruising, and yeah, that's it.
Cool. What did you think when you left? Did you think it was going to be easy or hard? And when you finished, you just finished actually not too many years ago.
Yeah.
Did you change? Did your expectations change?
Well, actually, we started racing together on small boats in the 1970s, and we actually did an Olympic campaign in 470s. And that's where we met Jean, who's on this call, and that's where we also met Mary Miniger, believe it or not. And then we then started racing a J24, and we raced that for 10 years. So we were comfortable with sailing with one another, racing with one another. But as for cruising, when our daughter Lisa was 13, we took a year off from our jobs, took her out of school, and we bought a 40-foot boat, which was lying in Mallorca. We flew over to Spain and sailed around a little bit in the Med, and then back across the Atlantic and around the East Caribbean. And that kind of was the impetus for cruising. We said, yeah, that's what we want to do in our later years. So that's what we did.
What kind of boat did you sail later on?
Well, we sold our house and we bought a Stevens Custom 50. It's designed by Rod Stevens, and the boat's name was Akka. Rob?
AKKA.
AKKA, Akka.
I'll bet you guys have a picture of
Here she is.
Akka.
We're
Just a
working with
second.
technology here.
We're
Hold
working
on.
with technology here.
It's a beautiful boat, the kind of boat you'd want to have if you were.
There
out
she is. She was built in Taiwan in 1987. She weighed 40,000 pounds. She was cutter rigged, a sloop, and had a fully battened slab reef mainsail. And her keel was a modified fin and drew 6.5 feet. Her cockpit is aft, or was aft, which is a little bit unusual for a cruising boat of that size, but it was, of course, what we were used to from sailing and from racing. And an aft cockpit is a lot more comfortable than a center cockpit because it's lower down and it's aft, so the motion is smoother. Below decks, the saloon was big and it was large and it was comfortable and airy, and it featured a galley with a 3-burner stove and an oven that was big enough for a carefully measured turkey. Rob, you were going to tell
Yeah.
this story, but I'm going to tell it since you're still
Yeah.
messing around here. When we bought her, Akka, we bought Akka. She was in Sandy Hook, New Jersey, which is just inside the New York Harbor, and we were in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We picked her up on a cold Thanksgiving weekend, and boy, were we happy to learn that the boat had heating in it. So we left for Hampton on Friday morning after Thanksgiving and had a beautiful blue sky and a westerly breeze. We reached to Atlantic City and spent the night there. And the next day we continued on. It was gray, but we still had a reasonable breeze. But when we got to the mouth of the Delaware Bay, the weather got worse. And we said, okay, let's just turn on the engine and go into Cape May, which is the only refuge on that part of the East Coast. And the engine wouldn't start. We tried everything to get it started. Even we bled the fuel lines and refilled them with clean diesel, but we couldn't get the boat to start, the engine to start. So we kept sailing. The wind came forward, and then it started to pipe up. And soon we were beating New Windward in what, 35 to 40 knot
30,
winds.
yeah, 40 knots of wind.
Yeah, under staysail and a double reef main. And the waves were up to the lower spreaders. And the eastern shore was to leeward. We could hear the surf and sometimes see the surf. Go ahead.
Well, believe it or not, that was when we really fell in love with the boat. We were safe and relatively dry, and the boat motion was easy, and the helm could be tended with one hand or a foot against the spoke. When we got to the mouth of the Chesapeake, the wind died almost entirely, and we ghosted into the dock at Hampton Yacht Club, which is our home club. We made an eggshell landing under sail. So a trip that could have scared us away from cruising instead gave us confidence in our boat and ourselves.
So we worked for another 3 years after we bought Akka, and in that time we sailed around in the Chesapeake Bay. We went offshore to Bermuda 2 times and to the Caribbean twice and up to Maine, actually with Rusty and Maine were on this call. And those trips taught us a lot about Akka and what cruising was like. So the first thing we did was sail down the Atlantic coast, and then we across the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas, and then we sailed, well, we actually motored up for a week to get to Bermuda. And a friend who was a good sailor joined us there, and we made the passage to the Azores. That was a 10-day downwind sleigh ride, and it was great fun, actually. We had a photo of us making landfall in Horta. This is us making landfall at Dawn in Horta. That's Pico, one of the volcanic peaks there. It was 1,900 miles from Bermuda, and we got there on Rob's 59th birthday on May 13th. Our friend flew home, and we spent about 2 weeks in the Azores fixing things that had broken and sightseeing and meeting other cruisers and having a good time. And then before we left, we followed tradition and we painted the boat name and our names on the wall at Horta. Yeah, so there's Akka's name painted on the wall at Horta. And incidentally, another friend of ours made a crossing in 2008, and our painting was still there. So the next passage was across the North Atlantic to England. And that turned out to be one of the hardest passages we ever took. It was just the 2 of us, and there were frequent gales and squalls. I was on watch, and the wind started to build pretty fast. I called Rob up to shorten sail, but by the time he got his warm clothes and foul weather gear on, we weren't used to that because we'd been in the tropics a lot. It took him a while, and it was blowing so hard, it was hard for us to furl the Genoa, even putting the line on a winch. So we bore off to put the Genoa under the wind shadow of the mainsail, and we managed to get it rolled up. But that turned out not to be a good move because the furl was very messy and the wind started picking at the places where it wasn't furled tightly and made little like bubbles or aneurysms. We tried to restrain them with the spinnaker halyards wrapped around first one way and then the other way. But sooner or later, the Genoa started freeing itself and it ripped itself to tatters while it was furled on the forestay. We still arrived safely in Falmouth 9 days after we left. We had ribbons flying from the forestay, and we got there and went into the Chain Locker, which is the local pub, and met Sir Robin Knox Johnson. He was there because the Around Britain race had just started, and the fleet had put into Falmouth because the weather was too severe to sail in.
Nobody told us that.
No, nobody told us. But anyway, there was a great sailmaker in Falmouth, so we bought a new suit of sails and everything was okay. But that was quite a tough experience.
I have a question.
That's-
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Was that the Bay of Biscay that you did this?
Oh, no, this
No.
is just coming from Falmouth. If you
From
look
the
at the
north.
chart, it's the long leg between, the Falmouth is just to the right of where it says Atlantic Ocean and up to England. That was the Azores, I'm sorry, from the Azores up to England. And that's, it was that
It was
route that
about
we,
2/3 of the way across on that.
but that's the North Sea and, you know, one can expect some pretty good winds up there occasionally. And that's what we
Yeah.
got.
So we did a Celtic cruise up the Irish Sea in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and then across the English Channel. Then we sailed down across the Bay of Biscay, and that turned out to be, despite its reputation, quite pleasant. And we sailed all the way down and around the Iberian Peninsula, making a quick stop in Gibraltar. And we did some provisioning, we did some sightseeing, and did some repairs. And then we continued into the Med, back to the chart, where we went to Barcelona, and where we had booked a berth in the marina.
Yeah, we spent 2 winters in Barcelona. The picture shows the marina, and Akka was down in that, where you see that tall mast. And you can see that marina is right in the city. So we came out of a gate, and you were immediately in the city, a few steps away from the old city called the Barri Gothique, with Roman walls and it's just incredible. And everything else was just museums, theaters, so on. No problem at all. We spent 2 winters there in Barcelona, and then 2 more in Marmaris, Turkey. In the Med, you can't really cruise in the wintertime because there are hurricane-force storms that come around. There's lots of good cruising in the winter, but there's nowhere to take shelter if a storm hits. The marinas are all full. And some of the marinas even have chains or ropes across the entrances to keep the boats from entering. But in actual fact, even in years when we weren't in the Med, we didn't really cruise all year long. We flew back to the United States at least twice a year, often for weeks or months at a time. And we wanted to visit Lisa and catch up with friends, sometimes for medical reasons. And for me to continue to judge and umpire sailing events.
The first Mediterranean summer we spent in the Western Med around Corsica and the Balearics. And then the next summer we went to Italy, went up the Adriatic coast to Venice, Croatia, Dubrovnik. There's a photograph. We went to Dubrovnik, we walked the walls. This was before the Game of Thrones, so there weren't a hell of a lot of tourists there. And then to Greece. And we went through the Corinth Canal to get to Turkey.
That's
The
cool.
Corinth Canal was actually started by the Roman emperors and finished sometime in the 1880s. It's 4 miles long and those walls are 300 feet high. It's quite something. So we continued from there on to Marmaris, Turkey. And the next summer we sailed in something called the Eastern Mediterranean Yacht Rally. The Eastern Mediterranean Yacht Rally went from Turkey to Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt. That was an amazing introduction to a wide variety of cultures, and unfortunately it would no longer be possible today. One of the places we visited, in fact, was Palmyra in the middle of the desert.
Which
and
ISIS destroyed, right?
yeah, it's So I don't think anybody can go.
And the other place that I
want to go to
remember
Syria today.
was the Great Mosque in Damascus in Syria. Can you imagine that we were standing there?
In the Great Mosque.
Incredible.
So in 2006, we reluctantly left the Mid, largely because the euro kept getting stronger and stronger against the dollar. And when you start to question whether you can afford to go to the local town square to have a cup of coffee, there's no point in being in Europe. So
We set sail for the west, and you can see we came through past the end of Greece, where we picked up our friend Gene Rankin, who's here in the meeting. We went up through the Straits of Sicily and Charybdis between Sicily and Italy, up to the French Riviera, and up eventually to the Spanish coast, and eventually around Spain and out Gibraltar all the way to Portugal, where our friend Carol Robinson joined us, and we sailed to Morocco. Morocco was a remarkable place because, of course, it's not laid out at all for any kind of cruising sailors or tourists or anything like that. And in the second port we went to in Morocco, it's Essaouira. That's a commercial fishing port. You can see here Akka tied up next to a fishing vessel, a really huge, smelly fishing, rafted outside, huge smelling fishing vessel. And we had to cross that every time we wanted to go ashore, and to climb about a 6-foot wall or 5-foot wall. But the other problem was in the morning before dawn, there was a wrap on the hull. We got out to find out what was the matter. Well, they wanted to leave to go fishing, so we had to untie and go out and motor around the harbor and then come back and tie up again. This is apparently a famous picture. Andy took this picture, but there's many more versions of it all over the internet. These fishing boats are
these are sardine fishers.
sardine fishermen. They're outboard motor driven, and every evening the fishermen come down to the harbor and they put their outboard motors on, and they put their nets in the boats, and they shove off all together and they go out into the sea and they fish all night long. And the next morning they come back with their boats filled with fish and smelly nets, and they take everything out, put it up in the market, and take their outboard motors and clean up their boats and pack them away here in this harbor again. It's a really beautiful sight.
Keep going.
So we sailed from Morocco to the Canary Islands, and 3 good friends, Jean and Sharon and Amy, flew in from the United States to join us. And we did some sightseeing and we did some provisionings and set off across the Atlantic.
The way you do this, actually, if you look at the chart, is from the Canary Islands, you don't go straight to the Caribbean. You sail south, more or less due south, until the butter melts, which is when that's about the trade wind belt. It's just off of the Cape Verde Islands. And then you hang a right and sail more or less due west to the Caribbean. And that's exactly what we did. We had 5 people on board. That was Andy and Jean were served as watch captains, and Amy and Sharon were serving as crew. And I didn't actually serve watches. Sometimes I relieved Andy so she could cook meals, but mostly I navigated or handled communications and did other skipperly things. We arrived in Barbados, and it was 2,800 miles out from the Canaries, 21 days. Sharon flew home from there, but the rest of us hopped down to Trinidad in time for Carnival. Carnival in Trinidad is amazing. It's a bucket list idea. There were days and nights filled with steel drums, beautiful, friendly people, and parades you could chip along to. That shows some people. There's Amy in the background photobombing. That's a couple who was costumed who were dancing around the streets. They danced from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, all over the place. And this is Andy in one of the headdresses given to her by one of the dancers who was exhausted, and I think on her way home. And Andy danced around with it a little bit and eventually gave it to a little girl who was
delighted to have it. I'm sorry I didn't take her picture too. So from Trinidad, we island hopped north through the Windward and Leeward Islands. We stopped at Antigua for race week, and then we got to St. Croix by summertime. That's in the Virgin Islands. There was a warning of an approaching hurricane, and our hurricane plan was very simple. Be where they're not. So we scurried all the way south to Curacao, and we spent a hot summer there, safe but hot summer there. And then when hurricane season was over, we hadn't finished with the Northern Caribbean, so we sailed back up the Caribbean, upwind, close haul on scarbor tack, hoping to reach the Virgins, but in content, we'd go wherever we got to. And that turned out to be Puerto Rico, the south coast. That was 370 miles northeast of Curacao. We spent about a month there and then sailed to the Dominican Republic and then to Haiti and Jamaica. And from Jamaica, we sailed north to Santiago de Cuba. And we spent 6 weeks moseying along the south coast of Cuba, which is about 500 miles. The bays on the south coast of Cuba are spectacular and mostly deserted, except for an occasional Cuban fishing boat.
In this picture, you can see, I hope you can see me in my dinghy right alongside the fishing boat. That's a lobster boat. And it has 1,000 or more lobsters on board at that point. They had called us over offering to give us a lobster. So I came over and thanked them and gave them a little bottle of rum that we brought along for that purpose.
We thought we'd get a couple of lobsters.
And I thought I'd get a couple of lobsters, and they brought a bushel basket of lobsters and just dumped it over the side. And I leapt up onto the seat of the dinghy to keep from getting my toes pinched. But we had lobster, we had more lobster. And even when the lobster boats weren't there, I could jump overboard with my snorkel mast, and immediately there would be lobsters underneath the boat. And I would decide, well, that was a little too small. And that's the big ones are kind of tough, so I don't want that. And then pick out a couple that are the right size. And so we had a lot of lobster.
Yeah, we one thing we learned in Cuba, the big lesson we learned in Cuba was you can actually get tired of eating lobster. So from Cuba, we crossed over to Isla Mujeres, Mexico. And while we were there, planning to spend some time, another hurricane came bearing down on us. So we decided it was time to head south again. And in those prevailing winds, we could just fetch to Cartagena, Colombia. So we sailed nearly close hauled again for about 900 miles. And we got to Cartagena in 8 days.
This time we were on port tack, so
Yeah.
evening things up.
We spent about 6 months in Cartagena and then left for Panama in 2009, January, I think it was, of 2009. And we planned to stop just for a little while in the San Blas Islands, the remote San Blas Islands of Panama, before going through the canal and onto the Pacific. But when we got to the San Blas Islands, we thought, oh my goodness, what could possibly be a better cruising ground than this? We stayed off and on for 3 years. The San Blas Islands run along the coast, running from east to west in Panama. They're sometimes called the Christmas Islands or the Yearly Islands because there's supposed to be like 365 of them. It's a pretty remarkable place with lots and lots of islands and a very interesting culture. These women are Kuna Indians. The San Blas Islands are actually an autonomous province of Panama. And the women there dress in their native costume, these puffy sweaters, puffy blouses, and on their bodice, there is a panel called a mola, which is made by reverse applique. And there's one on the front and one on the back. They have a wraparound skirt and they tightly wrap beads around their arms and legs. They wear this very traditional outfit. The men wear Bermuda shorts and t-shirts. The Kuna are the second shortest tribe of people in the world. We went through the Panama Canal in November of 2013. We had 4 friends on board handling lines. Ken, who's on this call, was one of them, and his wife, and Carol and Amy. The trip through the Panama Canal is both fascinating and totally boring at the same time. But when we got to the Pacific, we went north, or more accurately, pretty west, pretty quickly.
And we skipped Costa Rica altogether, and we stopped briefly in Nicaragua and then in El Salvador, and our next stop was Mexico. The very bottom where you see my cursor right there is the bottom tip of Mexico at Chiapas, and that's where we signed into Mexico, and then we reached along the coast, and we stopped in several times, a couple of small coves, and also Acapulco and Zihuatanejo. And then we stopped in at Barra de Navidad, which is about where my cursor is now, where our engine fell apart. Can I say? We had no transmission, and when we took it apart, when we opened everything up, we discovered the back of the engine had fallen off. So needed some new bolts and needed a lot more than that. So we spent a whole summer in Barra de Navidad, and fortunately, that was a super place to be for hurricane season because it's just a real hurricane. It's a hurricane hole.
Right. Oh, that was the Panama Canal.
Here's a picture of Barra de Navidad. You can see that that's a 5-star hotel sitting there and it's a cliff behind it, and the marina is right in front. So we tied up there, and the cliff protects you against any kind of hurricane winds. And the hotel was great because we got privileges at this 5-star hotel because we were at the marina. So we spent a lot of the summer swimming around in pools with swim-up bars. But then as soon as we could get out of there, we did, and we sailed to Puerto Vallarta, and we got there that fall. So that entire trip up the Mexican coast took us way less than a year.
We celebrated Thanksgiving in Puerto Vallarta. There's a huge United States sailing cruising community there, and it was great fun to have a traditional Thanksgiving dinner with people who shared our culture for a change.
So yeah, we crossed the Sea of Cortez, you could see here. And guess what? Another beat to winter. But it's about 200 miles to La Paz. And there we stayed. We were in La Paz for about 2 years, anchored off. And except when we went home, we put the boat in marinas. But while we were there, we were anchored. And we explored the Sea of Cortez, just a little part down there by La Paz. Marvelous, fascinating place to sail and explore. But by 2016, we were ready to come north to San Francisco. First, we had to sail south to Cabo. And here's our whole trip, but from La Paz down to Cabo, which is, that's 100 miles downwind. The prevailing wind is from the northwest, and we prepared for a great slide, invited Lisa and another friend to join us. But somehow it turned into a beat. The wind turned around 180 degrees, and it was blowing like 20 to 25 knots and choppy seas. We made it okay, but a little worse for wear. And well, and one very seasick crew member, although totally uncomplaining. But in Cabo, Lisa and our friend left, and the 2 other sailing friends,
Jean and Ken,
who are both here on this Zoom call, they joined us for the Clipper route offshore. So it turns out there are 2 ways to get a sailboat from Cabo to San Francisco. And one of them is a bash up the coast. You just go up the coast, and it's directly against the wind. The seas are really choppy. And by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind is blowing so hard that most boats can't make any progress against it in the steep seas. So they have to tuck into some nearby anchorage if they can find one, and then go the next day for a little bit. The alternative, or actually, there's 2 alternatives. One is you hire a delivery skipper, which a lot of people who have the money do. But the other alternative is to take the Clipper route. And here, that's what we did. So I'm going to show you here. This is a pilot chart with the winds off Baja California in the month of June. This is historical data, all data for the last 100 and some odd years. And as you can see, the little blue arrows are all wind direction. That's the common wind direction for each of those points. And as you can see, what happens is if you leave Cabo close hauled on starboard tack, you'll make it or on a close reach on starboard tack. You get out here and the wind, notice, goes to the right. It lifts you and you get lifted up and lifted up. And then eventually you're sailing, well, more or less parallel to the coast. And then you reach a point which is sort of even the same latitude as the border of Arizona and Mexico. And you then tack And now it turns out, because this is up here, you can see the effects of the Pacific High. What happens is we come up here and just get lifted and lifted and lifted and lifted, and that's San Francisco right there. So that's what we did. We set out to do that. And here's the effect. We came out as promised out here, got lifted and lifted, and eventually got lifted way more than we had expected. We're sailing up this route here, parallel to the coast, about 200 miles offshore. And we were doing 6 to 8 knots,
Yeah, we're about
absolutely steady.
almost 400 miles north of Cabo.
Yeah, when we were about 400 miles north of Cabo, unfortunately, we ripped the mainsail right across just below the reinforcements for the headboard. And
That sounds like we did it. The mainsail ripped
the
itself.
mainsail
It
ripped
just
itself.
sort of-
There you go.
you can see
Here's a
it
picture of
right
it.
up at the top.
You can
there.
see the little gap way up the top. And it still was connected by the Dacron part. This is a Mylar Dacron mainsail, and the Dacron part was still there, but clearly not serviceable, and there's no way we can continue sailing with that main. And it was definitely going to come apart more if we tried. So what we did was we turned for shore and we put in. We sailed to Ensenada, and that was
4 days.
about 4 days, and with no incident. We only had, of course, jib or staysail, but the boat went quite fast and quite well under just that. So we finally signed out in Ensenada and motored up to San Diego, checked into the United States, and then went up to Newport Harbor, and where we got a replacement mainsail at Minnie's. I'm not sure Minnie's still exists. It's definitely
Yeah,
closed
they
right
do.
now. But anyway, we installed it, and then Lisa flew down and joined us in Los Angeles, and we went up the coast. Well, we expected the real problem was going to be Point Conception, as everybody had told us about the storms and so on there, and the headwinds. But when we got there, it was dead flat, glassy calm, and we saw something really big in front of the boat. And came to a quick stop because we thought a big container or something like that maybe. But it turned out to be a blue whale sleeping peacefully on the surface. And we don't know how big it was, but it was a lot bigger than Akka, a lot bigger than 50 feet. So Andy had noticed what appeared to be breakers crashing against the shore, with the breakers spurting up in the air, this foam spurting up in the air. And then we realized that, no, that wasn't foam spraying in the air. That was blue whales blowing.
There
So
must have
we-
been 100 of them.
We motored toward the shore and killed the engine. And as we drifted toward the shore, the blue whales came around us, and there were at least 100 of them, and they were blowing all over the place, and some of them sounding, and several of them came curious and came up to visit us.
We took lots of pictures. You can't take pictures of whales. You
Yeah,
get
they don't
pictures
come out.
of their little bit of their tails or a spout here and there. There's no way to get a
Didn't
picture of a whale.
So we eventually, they left us, and we reluctantly turned on our motor and went up the coast. And we went all the way up in very, very light conditions, so just no issues at all. We sailed in under the Golden Gate Bridge on July 5th, 2016. And here is Andy and me, a picture taken by Lisa of Andy and me sailing in. Oh, gee, looks pretty cold. Must be San Francisco.
In July in San Francisco, here we are.
Once we got to here in the bay, we really only sailed Akka occasionally. She's really
Was
nice.
it actually the coldest winter you ever had?
Yeah, I'm
Being
afraid
Being in
so.
the summer? Yeah.
So we were ready for it. We knew San Francisco better, but we didn't. Akka was really not built for just day sailing around the bay, and all set up and equipped for deep water offshore cruising. And so we put her on the market, and we sold her last fall.
Oh,
Woof, I hope we haven't been too boring with all of that, so.
That
Oh,
is- yeah.
stop. It was awesome.
what was your favorite place?
Well, as you might have told from all of those photographs that we showed of the San Blas Islands, that certainly was one of our favorite places. We kept going back again and again to the San Blas.
I'm going through my pictures to find it.
John, could I say something?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ken.
We
Go
met
ahead.
Rob and Andy in the San Blas. As they mentioned, they spent 3 seasons. My wife and I had spent nearly 4.5 seasons there. Rob mentioned early on their delivery headed south to the Chesapeake that they gained confidence in Akka and their abilities. And I'd like to say that in my 10 years of cruising, I have never met another couple who are more competent than Rob and Andy on Akka. One experience in the San Blas, there's when you leave Panama and head to Cartagena, there's only a few places you can go ashore or get your boat in out of bad weather. One of which is a small marina called Panama Marina. The entrance to Panama Marina involves locating 2 PVC poles that are stuck in the bottom that mark the entrance channel. You go through the channel headed directly to shore. You see the reef breaking ahead of you, at which point you have to make a 90-degree turn to starboard. When that's done, you go about 200 yards and you make a 90-degree turn to port with reefs on both sides, and you're now going in. Once you make that left-hand turn, you are now faced with entering the marina 100 feet ahead of you. So you need to be able to control your speed. My wife and I went in there a couple of times, never with sails up. Rob and Andy went in there one time with their engine unable to operate. They sailed Akka in, and I could never imagine even attempting to sail that route into that marina and be able to bring the boat to a safe stop and get tied up. These guys are absolutely miraculous.
Why, thank you, Ken.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. That's very kind of you to say.
I'd forgotten that. That's one of those things that you like to put behind you.
I remember we had somebody on board once who reported after being on board with us, wow, Andy and Rob, they're crazy. They do all these crazy things, but to us, they don't seem really crazy. And I think we kept the boat going pretty well. There's a picture here of San Blas, of an island in San Blas, and it's pretty typical. White sand beaches surrounded by reefs, and off in the distance, can you see where my cursor is on the horizon? That's an offshore reef that protected the entire area that we
The
were
whole archipelago.
sailing in. And it didn't protect the Colombian end of the western end of the San Blas, but where we were sailing, that was protection. So the water was dead calm, even though you could see all the waves breaking
Look
from
at
the
the trees.
Caribbean and the trees blowing. It was a good breeze, strong breeze, but just no waves at all. Just absolutely gorgeous cruising. And I mentioned the reefs, and we saw this picture before, but I'll show it again. That's a Hallberg Rassy 48 that you see there, a wreck. And
There's a
they
reef
tell me,
behind him, but
and
he's
that,
missed.
yeah, it
But
shows you
different
one of the
one.
disadvantages of a reef. We saw a lot of boats on reefs. I would say by far the worst thing that happens to boats is running aground and not being able to get off. And in San Blas, of course, it's a coral reef, and a lot of times there's no way to get off. But anyway, Hallberg Rassy is a good boat, right? So any of you want a good boat, there
It's
you go.
probably still there.
It was there the whole time we were there. I'm pretty sure it's still in. This is a good picture of an anchorage. Trying to tell you why we like the San Blas, and that just these gorgeous white sand beaches and anchorages. Here's everybody coming ashore for a party.
Ken, your dinghy's probably there too.
I sure then Ken's dinghy is there. And here's sometime when we just came ashore by ourselves, and that's our dinghy, and that's Akka back in the background there. So another anchorage, and this gives you an idea of at the time, what was this, 2000, the early 2000s, right? Mid 2000s. At that time, at least, the number of boats was not great. There were always 4 or 5 boats in an anchorage. maybe, but not dozens of boats. And as you can see, the boats were anchored, were easy to separate ourselves and not get in trouble. Anybody like beaches?
There are beaches.
This is what they look like. Now, the whole archipelago, the whole San Blas is owned and operated by the Guna Indians. And here's the only bar within miles for cruising sailors, run and operated by the Guna Indians. And here's me getting food.
Rob kept us in fish during the time we were in the San Blas Islands. We ate a lot of fish, and it was thanks to Rob.
I could easily keep us fed in fish. So here's a Guna woman. And what I love about these women is they always sat so upright. Her back is absolutely straight, and they always sat like that, chin up, proud. It's a matriarchal society, and they're clearly in charge. Over here, you can see a Guna man standing in, or they didn't wear traditional clothing. They only wore whatever they felt like. I think you showed this picture before. And those molas, you see that around the waist. Here's one right with we have right here behind us. That's and we own. If anybody wants to buy some, we own a lot of them. I'll be happy to.
And I'm sure Ken and Marilyn own a lot of them, and I know Jean and Kitty own a lot of them. And anybody who's ever
Lisa
been,
owns some, I think so.
anybody who's ever been there owns them.
I have a few, well,
They went from place to place in Ulus, these dugout canoes, and they really are dugout canoes. We actually went with them one time when they felled a tree and started to cut away the center of to make a dugout. So everything you see, all the boats that you see that they're in are dugout canoes. And these sailboats didn't have stays. That's an unstayed mast. The guy standing up there
He's the stay.
he's holding the mast up.
They went hundreds
Here's
of
a-
miles out to sea in order to get fish. They were remarkable. They
And
just-
sometimes paddled
Yeah,
long distances
they had
to
great-
get from one place to another.
great shoulders and great muscles, skinny legs.
Here's a Guna village. Basically all of the waste disposal is just little huts on docks with a hole in the bottom. And they just went out and used it, and that was it. Here's a aerial picture of one of the islands, one of the major islands, and you'll notice that there's the traditional architecture with thatched roofs. They had walls that were just reeds that were vertical, tied together. And from inside, you could see everybody in the street through the walls, but from outside, you couldn't see in because it was dark inside. But you can also see that there were modern buildings as well. I think this one was erected by the Mormons, but I'm not entirely sure.
The Kunas are concerned about global warming, and you can see why.
Yeah.
They're just barely afloat there, so it's going to be quite a problem for Gunayala. Since we left there, it's
They know
changed.
about it.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. When we were there was frequently only like one telephone on one island in about 20 miles and no electricity on most of them. And now the government has provided solar panels. So unfortunately, there are now television sets in some of those thatched.
Well, when we were first there was one public telephone in each little village, and they would put a person, a woman usually,
Yeah.
right by the telephone, and she was the telephone answerer. And so when the telephone rang, she'd find out who it was and who they wanted to talk to, and then she'd put down the phone and run
Or
at
send a
full
kid.
speed, or send a kid to run at full speed to whoever it was that was being asked for, and that person would run back and get on the phone. By the time we left, everybody had a cell phone, and people would come up to our boat with a cell phone asking if they could charge their phone on our batteries. This is a picture of there you can see these big dugout skiffs. Some of them were small and some of them were big. There's a small one. That's what's his name?
Reuben.
That's Reuben and his son, who fished every day and brought us fish in case I hadn't gone. Sometimes I just had to say, look, Reuben, I just got a fish. But other times we bought fish from him, and he said, what, can I have a beer?
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, we got some questions from the audience. Staff
yeah.
Commodore Eaton has a question. Anybody that has a question, click the mute button so we can hear you. And when you speak, your picture will come up.
Hi, it's Jerry and Karen Eaton. Can you hear me?
Hey,
Yes,
Jeff.
we
Yes,
can.
Audrey.
Hi, guys. This is so delightful to see this. Just let me say that. This, for us, and I think for all the San Francisco Yacht Club people that are watching, it's just so delightful. And Karen and I track much of your track, not as long in each place, which we regret now. But anyway, here's the one question I have. Okay, it's a deep question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. When you were in Trinidad, did you do dirty moss?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. All right.
I was in the street, somebody tried to pick my pocket during Dirty Moss. And I was able to stop him. I grabbed his arm. Nothing happened, but yeah, we did the whole thing. But we didn't join. Anybody can join these bands that they call
Right,
them,
yeah.
people dancing. And if you do that, you can get a costume. And the costumes rank from a few bucks to over $100 for a costume. And when Carnival is over, the next day or day after is the first meeting of the band for the next year, and they
For
start
the steel
making
drum
costumes
bands.
and so
Yeah,
on.
I know. We remember that well, and we love Trinidad and the Caribbean and all that. And I envy you your trip across the Pacific, because actually we'd sold the boat and I was with a new owner, and we went down south. We went all the way down to Easter Island, Pitcairn, and up to Tuamotus. But your trip sounds delightful, and we just wish, Karen and I wish we had spent more time in each place as you guys did. So good on you.
Rob and Andy,
Yeah, hi, Jean.
why don't you tell them about the coming of age ceremony that we were fortunate enough to witness?
Well, okay, we don't have any pictures about it, but
Let me-
go ahead, Andy.
Well, we mentioned that the Laguna Indians are a matriarchal society, and young girls wear their hair long, and when they go through puberty, there is a celebration of them becoming a woman. They're isolated for several days and they get their hair cut short. And then at the end, there's a big ceremony, and in each village has a big meeting hall, and while the young lady is in her isolation, they are brewing chicha, and which is a corn based in the case of the San Blas Islands, a corn or coconut based alcoholic beverage. Awful tasting stuff. But everybody in the village comes to celebrate this young woman coming of age.
So I want to interrupt and tell you, this isn't a time like quince años, when she's 15 years old. When she has her first period, the word spreads around the entire village, and everybody is ready for the ceremony. And that's everybody knows.
There's no secret to this.
There's no secrets in these villages.
No.
Oh my God, I would have been mortified.
Well, it's a different culture. Think about it. It's a different culture.
Yeah, it's a different culture. And everybody gets very, very drunk. So drunk.
yeah.
Well, the mom and the whole family, of course, is there, and all of the relatives, and everybody said they're tiny people, right? And they're sitting on little logs, very low to the ground, because they're very low to the ground. And every now and then, one of these, I'm sorry, Jean wanted to hear this story, and it's really rather remarkable. One of these women would just sort of lean over and throw up because she had had so much to drink, and then maybe almost pass out. So her sisters would run under each arm, and off they'd go, and they'd take her away to go sleep it off.
And
a
they'd
couple
say,
of hours
and they'd
later,
say cheerfully, "We'll be back."
we'll be back. The ground was sand, and somebody else would come over with a bucket of sand and cover up where she
All the
had-
vomit,
where
right.
she had thrown up. And a few hours later, damned if she didn't come back again and start drinking all over again. It was quite something.
Hey, tell them about Lisa and her role in the community.
Oh, one of the mola makers. This is not our daughter Lisa. This is a
Not ours.
Valerie.
woman named Lisa. She is a master mola maker, And Lisa began her life as Lawrence, but identified as a
So
woman.
she's trans.
So she is trans, and she lives her life as a woman, and she is extremely well respected in the Kuna community. She makes beautiful molas, and in fact, we commissioned her to make a mola, which celebrates Akka and our boat. And she took us, when our friend Linda, who just popped in here, was with us, we went on a tour with Lisa, and she showed us some of the traditions having to do with the belief in the religion is very spirit-based, and yeah, it's a kind of a remarkable society.
We really enjoyed, part of being there was to learn about and try to understand. We felt like we were anthropologists, you know, discovering and learning about, we read about a lot also about the culture. It was a lot of fun. We thought maybe you guys would like to hear what we thought it was like offshore.
So, well, being offshore is pretty great. It's sometimes really magical. It's, you know, it's always the same, but it's always different. And there's nothing quite so spectacular as sunrise at sea. And there's nothing as nice as the sound that water makes when it gurgles under your hull when you somebody identifies with that.
Was that you, Mo?
I do too, that it's that swish. Swish,
Yes, isn't it?
swish,
And it always seems like you're going really fast, which is
Yeah.
great. Wow, we're making really great progress.
And I'm always amazed that people would say to me, don't you get bored? And it's like, are you kidding? No.
Well, offshore.
With the two of us.
Right?
Yeah, we served watches that we did nominally 3 hours on and 3 hours off. But the way we worked that was that the person who was standing watch always decided when it was time to change watches, because sometimes it can be boring or just a beautiful night and the boat's just ghosting along. There's no problems. And so if I was on watch, I might extend my watch to 4 or 5 hours before I got Rob up. We thought the system worked much better because when you have a fixed watch, the person who's off watch never quite gets a good sleep for that last hour. They're always thinking, is it time? Is it time? Is it time? And so you don't get as good a sleep. So with our watch system, they can just sleep comfortably and know that the person on deck would wake them up when it's time to get up. You know,
Andy and Rob, thank you so much for doing this. I know you put a lot of work in it. I don't know if anybody noticed because you guys wrote all the words that you spoke tonight. There was a lot of ad lib and I was trying to follow it all because I had a role in doing some of the slides and asking the questions, but you are probably, I would say 50 or 60% of the way to doing a book. You ever think about writing a book? Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I'll buy a copy.
Who has a question? We're going to get these guys off to their cocktails and dinner.
Yep.
I
Okay.
just want to say poor Dawn, because now I want to get a cruising boat and go. Sorry.
Okay. Great,
wanna say
great,
thank
great
you to
stories. I think
Rob and
everybody,
Andy.
one way or another, has been to a lot of places like this, but to actually, you know, there's a difference between flying to them and being there and actually sailing there and doing the arduous part of the journey. It makes it really riveting and colorful. Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Rob and Andy.
Thank
we
you,
will-
Rob and
Thank
Andy.
you, everybody, for coming.
thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks, guys.
See y'all. Yeah, you're very
Thank you,
welcome. We'll
Robin.
see y'all next month. Hopefully we'll be on the Cove House and not off Zoom, but we can always meet here.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Rob and Andy. It was awesome.
You're welcome, Mo. Thank you for asking us.
Well, as much as I know about you, I learned even more.
Thank you, Rob and Andy. So good to
We'll see
see
you
you.
again soon, Mo.
Good to see you, Linda.
Good to see
Yeah.
you.
We need to get together.
Yes, indeed, we do.
Big hugs.
On shore this time.
Oh, yeah.